And welcome to the Medical Cannabis Hour with your host, Dr. Allan Frankel.
Good morning, everybody. This is Allan Frankel. Do you have a cannabis-related question that you'd like to ask a doctor? Are you not finding your answers anywhere? Does your doctor not know the answers? Do you need a medical professional's opinion related to cannabis? That's why we have this show. I can talk as openly within reason, and we're getting many, many emails this week with questions for the show that I'll be answering later. But we're going to start the show with our guest, Dr. Jeffrey RABER, who has been a long-term colleague and friend of mine. And although he and I haven't talked about this yet, he just had an article published in a pretty great journal of toxicology, talking about the level of pesticides in cannabis. And it's a huge issue, and it turns out that it's actually a very important clinical issue. Jeff, are you there?
Yes, good morning, Allan. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Congratulations on you and CITSA getting the article published.
Oh, thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. That was a very proud moment for us, I'd say.
So could you tell us a little bit, first, although you were on my show 3 or 4 years ago with Barbara, a lot has changed since then. I mean, everything's changed since then. The issue with pesticides, I mean, a lot of people assume that the pesticides either aren't such a big deal, or they use them in small amounts, or I hear growers all the time saying, well, if you just don't spray the plants too close to flowering, they'll be excreted by the plant and you'll be fine. And of course, we all wonder about that, and now you've done a study. And could you summarize for us what your feelings are?
Yeah. Oh, certainly. One of the questions we had was, well, if I have a pesticide on there, is that what I would actually inhale? How do I know how harmful it is? Like you, we've heard, oh, I don't apply it towards the end of the cycle. I'm not too close to the flowers. It should be okay. I think the word pesticide is very, very broad. You can have ones that are systemic going all through the plant. You can have ones that are only sprayed on the plants, ones that degrade very fast, and ones that don't. Other ones are more toxic than others as well. So what we sought to understand was if there's some on the flower, how much of that may you inhale? And what we realized was if you're using a short handheld glass pipe, which is pretty common, I would say, very similar to a joint, you can inhale up to 70% of the pesticide amount that is on the flower, depending on what the pesticide is. So we understand now that you directly inhale that, and inhalation is more dangerous than oral consumption because you don't have liver metabolisms or your stomach acid to break things down and different absorption rates. It's basically like injecting it right into you. So the tobacco industry had done similar studies, and their rationale for them is, well, we put a filter on it because it stops most of the pesticides from being inhaled, but if there's still some on tobacco, it doesn't matter because the product's going to kill you anyway. So here, which is like,
you know what? It's hard to argue. Yeah. That's pretty hard to argue with.
It is. So, about 2 to 15% within tobacco can be consumed, and they thought that was acceptable. But I think when you have immunocompromised people or people with chemotherapy treatments, that very sick or elderly individuals, it's important that they're not consuming any of those pesticides. So the first step in understanding what application limits we can set as to when you can use things and when they break down the right way is to understanding how much you want to allow onto the plant, and that's why we took this first step to understand how much could I inhale. That will help me understand how much I want to allow on the plant, which then leads to how I can apply it properly so we can set application standards with the right compound.
Yeah, I think there's one very, very obvious substantial difference between cigarette smoking and cannabis ingestion. There is nowhere that I've ever heard of an indication or a diagnosis where smoking is like 2 puffs of a high nicotine, cigarette, every 2 hours. I've never seen or heard of that. But cannabis does have medical implications that are substantial. So to start with any harmful chemicals just limits everything. So how would you answer the following question? All right, so there's some pesticides in this. There's pesticides in food and other things that are really essential for us. I guess the inhaled issue is the big one, as you said, and that makes sense since you don't have first-pass metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
But is there any available information on long-term buildup and toxicity and what really might be a clinical, because I don't want people to be overly scared, but I want people to be cautious. So what about long-term studies or any studies showing that this is cumulative and toxic?
So that's where most of the pesticide data is generated by the EPA or other agricultural entities. They say, how long does it take at which amounts per day do you consume until you start to see cancer in the rat, or in the other animal model. So different compounds have different toxicity levels, and it matters. And some are significantly different than others. It depends on the individual compound as to how much of that you may be allowed to have. And they also then try to take into consideration on which product is it and how much might you be eating. So I want to say how many micrograms of this compound per kilogram of strawberries would be different than per oranges, apples, watermelons, or lettuce. But it may be the same compound. I'm just going to assume you're going to eat more weight in apples than you will in lettuce. So I have to look for that in different amounts. And what we're trying to understand with cannabis is, take the case of a relatively small individual, say 40 kilograms, and that they would consume 10 grams a day, which is a pretty large amount. How much then could they ingest as a pesticide being on the plant? So the picture is very broad. It's hard to say specifically how toxic or not toxic. Certain ones could be far more toxic than others. I think if you continuously ingest them, though, they will certainly build up. Your liver will not be able to keep up and metabolize those the right way. So, and I think you should keep in mind in inhaling, you're going to need to expose yourself to less than you would if you were eating it. So it's a very different product, and it does depend on how it's actually going to be used as to how we would go about setting standards for how much pesticides are on there. And I just wanted to comment so that we don't scare everybody. We see about 10 to 15% of the samples that we've randomly selected do fail for some sort of pesticide, and we're not able to look for every single one of them we'd like to as well, so we may be missing some too.
Right. That I would imagine a couple of things, that the people who are sending in tests to you are assuming they have pretty good product. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that would never test anything that I think would be, more questionable. And also,
they definitely don't submit it if they know they sprayed it. So
if the testing is not on the bottle, either the testing was not done, which is likely, or it was done and it was horrible, so they can't post it. So how's the response to the article?
Wow, it's been overwhelmingly positive. A lot of people have said this was, very important to understand. It was the reviewers even commented it was novel work that was very important to establishing good regulations. And we've gotten just overwhelming support from the community saying it was really nice to see good, solid work done. All the other labs within California have congratulated us, and we're really proud to say thanks for showing what labs can do and why we're all here. So it was, it's really good. Very, very.
It's positive. Awesome. It's really awesome. And I would, from what I've seen in the community and particularly in the growing community, it's likely that the people who are using pesticides and maybe not being nearly as open about it are probably the same ones that are using other hormonal supplements that can be potentially dangerous, the bud enhancers, the quick big
plant
buds.
Growth regulators. Yeah.
So, actually, since I think we have a few minutes, could you speak for a moment about plant regulators and they're basically used in plants at some point in flowering to get more and more and more into the bud, but they do then affect us.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Plant growth regulators are typically hormonal, receptor activators or inhibitors. So they're messing with the hormonal balance of the plant so that it generates a more vibrant product, I would say. They're outlawed in California. You're not allowed to use them here. Typically, they've been used on ornamental plants to make the flowers look bigger and brighter, but they're not good for the environment. They're not good for us, so therefore we decided as a state to not really allow them here. They are unfortunately getting into
they're all over the place. Yeah.
Right. They're everywhere, though. And sometimes unbeknownst to the cultivator. They heard, hey, this nutrient system works, or this is the new one. it doesn't clearly put it on the label, and later they found out, they're like, well, I didn't put that directly on there. I didn't try to use that. And we find out that it was actually in their nutrient system. And then, once they've learned that, they decided to switch and change their ways and figure out a better way of doing it. So it is pretty prevalent, though. I would say it does. I mean, it makes your plants bigger, and if you're going to be compensated by the weight of what you produce, you're geared to want to do that, I'd say.
And we are going to be back with the Medical Cannabis Hour with Dr. Allan Frankel right after the break. And watch for Dr. Frankel every single Wednesday at 4 p.m. in his regular slot. We'll be back right after the break. This is the Medical Cannabis Hour with your host, Dr. Allan Frankel.
Thanks, Barbara. We're back for the second segment of our hour with Dr. Jeffrey RABER. Hey, Jeff.
Hello. Hi, Dr. Frankel.
Yeah, if you can hang on with us for a while. We have some, I've got actually a stack of emails here. I think it's more convenient for people to send in questions. And one of the patients who sent in, Brian, has a whole list of questions that have a lot to do with specific cannabinoids. And I think also just listening to the questions will have, maybe both of us can help clear up some misnomers. So I'm going to read the questions exactly the way Brian wrote it. The first question that we can discuss is what is the difference between the alcohol extractions, then parentheses sprays, and CBDs with an S at the end in oil. So first, I'd like to make a quick comment that, one, it is not CBDs. I think we all hear that all the time. I hear it all the time. I presume you do as well, Jeff?
I'm laughing. Yes, yeah.
That's why you're laughing.
We hear it all the time.
Nobody says THCs. And I think where it comes from is there is the term cannabinoids, which represent THC, CBD, CBDA, CBG, THCVA, 80, 90 or so of them. Mm-hmm. But cannabidiol is not the same as cannabinoids. It's one of 80 or to 100 cannabinoids, just like THC. Right. So CBD is a single molecule. It doesn't represent anything else other than whatever number of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms put together. And then the other thing, before I ask Jeff to comment on it, there's this whole, I think, real big area of confusion on what oil means versus extraction versus sprays versus extracts versus tinctures, and maybe try simplify all of this. The essence of making any non-raw cannabis product involves separating the plant material as much as possible, at least in this circumstance, from the molecules that are alkaloids, the human medicines that we can benefit from. It's not that we can't benefit at all from chlorophyll, but it's not hugely important and it has issues. So when you're separating it, no matter what process you use, you are then left with an oil, the plant oil. Like if you're taking sesame seeds and you extract it, it's sesame oil or poppy seed oil or olive oil or grapeseed oil. Yeah, anything. And then that oil can be diluted and mixed in various ways to make products from edibles to, quote, sprays, extracts, or whatever.
Tinctures, creams, yeah, you name it.
Anything. So, Jeff, what about your experience in the terminology issue and the CBDs? What do you think?
It's quite confusing out there, I would say. We're not all using the same terms, and not everybody completely understands the difference between everything they look at or mention, especially, I'd say, all the different terms for a concentrated form, from an Earl to a Deb to a wax to BHO to Rick Simpson oil. I mean, those are all extracts of some type. They all have different purities, different ways you got there, and sometimes different contaminants that go along with it. The idea of CBDs, we definitely shouldn't make it plural. unless we're referring to CBDA, cannabidiolic acid, and CBD itself. But I think those two are so drastically different in physiological response that we should not lump them together. They're two separate molecules. So we see that, unfortunately, quite a bit. And a lot of people call things tinctures, and sometimes they're not quite a tincture. So it is. I would say it's very confusing. We probably need a good reference dictionary that everyone could agree on. But
maybe we could write one up
every week. Yeah, we'd be constantly amending it too. I think there are definitely new terms coming out all the time.
Yeah,
I've been trying. Patients being confused.
I've been trying to cut down, at least on the products that we tend to suggest for patients, on the use of the term tincture, and then replacing it with extraction, which one to me sounds much more like an herbal nutraceutical. I'm helping my patients obtain extracts of the plant than a tincture, which I think by definition implies a lot of alcohol being used in the creation.
Yeah. 70-80%
so,
alcohol from the extract point. Yeah. The tinctures that were used in the turn of the century, way back in the day, I would say, they were 70-80% alcohol. So I think that it does refer to that herbal extract can be in glycerin or in a different substrate, so that it's not going to cause the same effects as alcohol would, or it's not going to burn your mouth as much either. So certainly I like herbal extract a lot better too.
Yeah, I mean, we've all recently, by recently I mean in the last 2 years, seen 60 to 80% alcohol extracts on shelves in collectives in California. It's almost like pure alcohol. So
and the concern there would be contraindications with other medications too, right? So I don't think you want to be consuming large amounts of alcohol with your medication. That's typically not well tolerated.
No, you should
with
do that
other
separately.
medications.
Yes. It's a separate drug, and it doesn't make sense. So what do you think? I mean, a lot of people are using alcohol, which is a very, very efficient extractant, and the oils that I've seen from that, and I've got to say, even though I'm certainly a big fan of CO2 organic extraction, that the alcohol extracts, when they're made right and people are evaporating off all the alcohol, other than they're not being as clean from a plant material aspect, don't seem like such a bad way to extract oil. You want to beat me up on that?
It's highly efficient, and I mean, in theory, it's a food product, so it's not. People do consume it, so you're not going to be adding chemicals you wouldn't want to ever ingest, and you can get rid of it pretty easily. So, and it is fairly efficient and does pull out the right things from the plant. So I could see it works. It's just maybe a little bit more selective to pulling out some of the chlorophyll too. Those are a little more green than some other approaches, but it's really it is pretty efficient in what it's trying to do.
But what about butane? I was talking, as a matter of fact, yesterday to somebody who makes, quote, concentrates, and he came in with an amazing gold extract that I thought was maybe bubble hash or even a CO2 extract for the cleanliness. And I mean, when an extract is really, really clean, this to our viewers, our listeners, it's gold. It's a gold yellow. It is the gold. It may be the gold talked about in the Bible. It is a golden oil. It's not a black-green oil.
It's lightly, yellowish brown almost, very light color though.
It's kind of the color that would be in the terpenes.
Butane's it's a complicated topic. So it's easy to remove from the product relatively, but some of it still stays around. I mean, like dissolves like, and half of the THC molecule is just like butane. So to get out the final residues of that can be very, very difficult. And we don't see many people doing very well with that. Our residual solvent screen is probably sub-ppm level accurate. It can detect that low, and we still see lots of butane in most of those things, even if they're solids and they crumble. I think the other concern is I'm not an attorney, but we understand that it is illegal to use that process within California with medical cannabis. So it's a concern because it is easy to get to, it is efficient, it's relatively inexpensive for people to start trying to do that. There are great hazards at home for blowing yourself up, many cases that we've heard of, and it's also fairly easy to leave some of it in the product. So it's a tough one. It does produce a very nice concentrate product. It is very efficient in removing what you're after on the plant. But I think you need, well-defined experts in handling it. Other states like Colorado and Washington are going to make sure that you're not allowed to do that in a residential area. And then maybe we could have, more professional setups that recapture butane, handle it safely, and people that can make sure it's eliminated from the product. And then, in theory, you could be able to use it pretty safely, I think. So I think it's efficient. It's just we have to handle it the right way, which we're probably not doing very well today yet.
Right. Well, here's the second question, which actually is related to the first question from the same caller. And here he's kind of using CBDs correctly. Will CBDs, and then in parentheses, CBDA included, so there is a proper use perhaps of
That's
CBDs.
Correct. Yeah. Will
CBDs, including CBDA, have strong psychoactive effects without THC? This is a very complicated question, and involves whole plant medicine versus molecular, which I'd like to talk about from my clinical experience, and maybe you can have some input after the next break. But I think this might be a great question to help people focus on molecular CBD and dosing of that, things they hear from studies around the world, versus dosing of whole plant medicine. It's many fold different. So we'll be cutting to our break and returning with Dr. Jeffrey RABER in just a moment. Thanks for joining the Medical Cannabis Hour.
Dr. Allan Frankel. And Allan, you have a caller, Barbara from Lancaster, is on the line.
Hi, Barbara. Welcome to the Medical Cannabis Hour. You have a question for us?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Dr. Frankel. I appreciate your information and the advice that you provide to so many of our patients. My particular question has to do with workers' comp in the state of California and medical cannabis. I don't know if you've dealt with patients who are in a workers' comp situation for using medical cannabis here in California. I had cervical spine surgery in June last year, and I still have residual pain, neurological pain, as well as issues with my elbows and arms with cubital tunnel syndrome, pinched nerves in that area as well. I am in physical therapy for the neck, and they just gave me a cortisone shot in my left elbow yesterday. I really don't like taking the Vicodin and Lyrica that they've given me. It's been almost a year of me taking that stuff, and I'm trying to get off of it. So I've been using the typical dispensary-type flowers, dried flowers, and smoking it with a vaporizer. But I prefer to grow and have a backyard that's big enough that I can grow. I started some plants, so I don't have any that are CBD rich. At this point, I don't know which ones may be, but I guess my question is kind of multifold because I'm rambling a little bit. I apologize.
That's okay.
The workers, my attorney for the workers' comp case, they've approved my case and they've approved the claim for my workers' comp, so I'm not having to fight them on that. But my attorney said that I need to use a dosable cannabis in order to get reimbursed, or at least allow him to fight for reimbursement for me for the cannabis use. And he asked me also if I was using it instead of the Lyrica or instead of the Vicodin. And right now I'm not, because the smoking and the vaporizing of it, that is, doesn't alleviate enough of the pain. So it is, with the ones that are higher in THC, distracting enough that I don't have to think about the pain as much.
So the issue, as I understand, there's really two separate issues here.
Right.
One issue is, which the attorney brought up, which I would have brought up had you asked me first, is I would use dose cannabis medicine for any patient that wants to get the most control over their cannabis use. And I'm amazed. I'm truly amazed that an attorney would recommend dose cannabis medicine. So it makes me wonder
very
if they're talking. Yeah. Or Jeff, Dr. RABER, an organic chemist I work with, is also on the phone with us. He's a guest today. So I've never heard an attorney use that term. So either they
what happened? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm going to clarify that. I told him that I got a recommendation for medical cannabis, and I asked him if I could be reimbursed for my costs, and that's when he told me that he has fought successfully for others' work comp cases and had reimbursement for their dose medical cannabis.
That is, well,
that's awesome.
That's awesome. And you know what I'd love to do? If you know how to call into the show, you can certainly check out I'll get a plug for my website, greenbridgemed.com, or just type Allan Frankel into Google and send me a note. The office number I'll give you too, 310-821, 310-821-9600. And the first thing that I would like to do, I don't know what you think, Jeff, is I'd like to talk to your attorney. I mean, because... Yeah,
what classifies dose medication? If you're growing it yourself, you're making it yourself, do you just have to know what that is? Or does it have to be provided to you in some other fashion that had batch number, lot things, and everything done GMP? What's the level of what, quote-unquote, counts as dose medicine there?
Exactly, and that was my question, too. I think he was talking about, those capsules that have the CBD capsules you mentioned in a previous show, the DixieX.com capsules. He's thinking in terms of that type of dose.
Right. If he's talking about, which is what I'm hoping he's talking about, is to the patient, these are your issues, and I'd like you to take 2 milligrams of whole plant cannabis per spray with 2 milligrams of whole plant THC under your tongue 3 times a day. Now, to me, that sounds and feels, and I do that all day long. That's what we do. We're developing treatment plans. So it's absolutely dose medicine. Now, if that's what he's meaning, then this is the guy I want to get to know better because...
me too.
This is an amazing, amazing thing. Now, if he means
Barbara, if you could stay on hold for a few minutes, we could get that number. We actually have Wilma from Santa Monica holding as well, Dr. Frankel.
Okay, so I think the next step is to find out reimbursement for the workman's comp issue, but for the medical issue, either from other shows or there's something perhaps we could do separately. We do have dosage and administration guides on our website at greenbridgemedmed.com. And you could show that to your attorney and actually just show him the dosage administration guide. But again, I'd love to speak with him.
Okay.
If you could stay on the line for a moment, we'll get the number.
Please stay on the line,
we have
and
another
our board
caller.
op will get your
I'll stay on the line.
Get your number.
Okay,
Monica,
thank
are you there?
very much.
Monica? Hello, Monica?
Or Wilma from Santa Monica.
Wilma. Wilma?
Okay, we lost her, but we have Rita from Topanga now holding.
Rita from Topanga.
Yes, Rita George. Hi, Dr. Frankel.
Hi, I know Rita George from Topanga.
You know me.
Thanks for calling in.
Well, an excellent idea. Felicia told me about it. I think it's really a great service. So thank you for adding to your repertoire. You have suggested to me that I put the spray on bread with either butter or avocado, something fatty, because I was having trouble with my taste buds. I was actually losing taste. So do you, first of all, feel this is just as beneficial since I'm doing it as an anti-tumor setup?
I believe so. I mean, the issue with, and this is one of the reasons we're actually currently looking at, Jeff is actually a perfect call for you as well, because as a physician who's now talking to people about oral buccal or sublingual, in the mouth being absorbed directly before it's swallowed and then goes into the stomach, and then by necessity it goes through the liver, is metabolized and made into a longer acting and somewhat different hydroxylated medication. Patients vary. I mean, there's so many variables. I mean, even in the oral buccal route, if somebody is, and that's why we're looking at different oils, maybe grapeseed oil, because it'll kind of stick to the buccal membranes. But when somebody's swallowing something, the absorption rate, as I understand it, in some studies has been as little as 5% to as much as 20-30%, which is really variable. Is that, Jeff, does that fit with what you understand?
Yeah, it certainly is variable depending on what the carrier is. I think like Marinol was studied with sesame seed oil, and you can get I think it was almost as high as 40% efficiencies that way. But that can be exceptionally low as well, and it may be impacted by what you eat. And I think in her case, what she needs to consider is the mucosal route is going to deliver CBD, but orally you're going to have the liver metabolite. Is one as good as the other? In the case of THC, the liver metabolite is 5 times a stronger acting, receptor inhibitor for CB1, but it's slightly different. And, it acts a little bit differently. People have different effects from that. So I don't know if you can say they're going to be exactly the same. It's certainly a lot longer lasting, but I don't know many studies that have been done with the 11-hydroxy version of CBD that the liver would make, if that's exactly what it makes even, as opposed to, CBD itself. So it's a little hard to directly extrapolate that the efficacy could be the same. That's a challenge, I would say. We don't really know today.
And we don't know for sure. I mean, some of the studies that I read from international sources use oral CBD, and some of them use oral buccal for whole plant, let alone molecular CBD, which is another whole question. But when we come back from our break in just a little bit, I think this might be a good opportunity to talk about some of the oral absorption issues and some ideas like measuring CBD levels, whole blood CBD levels as being a great way to start resolving some of these. So we'll be back soon with the Medical Cannabis Hour with me, Dr. Allan Frankel. Thanks for listening.
Back with the Medical Cannabis Hour with your host, Dr. Allan Frankel.
Thanks, Barbara. We're entering our third segment. The show is really fun today. We have Dr. Jeffrey RABER, who just published a toxicology article showing that a number of growers are using way too much pesticides, and these pesticides are being maintained in the cannabis and then definitely passed into us when they're smoked. And we just had a caller who we were talking about oral absorption versus sublingual or oral buccal absorption, and the difficulties that I have as a clinician in knowing if you pick a dose, let's say one spray, which is generally in a number of the collectives 2 milligrams of whole plant CBD and a varying amount of, but stated and fixed per extract, THC and a whole plethora of terpenes, how different is it orally versus oral buccally? And in my experience, it's at times really hard to predict what's going to happen, particularly with the oral route, and that's because the absorption is so irregular. And what we've been doing so far with some of the extracts, that where a sublingual dose is just maybe can be too much, or it's an issue where we don't need rapid absorption, and the CBD, even whole plant absorption, it's quite different as far as the long-term effect. With THC, once it goes through the liver and it has a change there, the 11-hydroxylation and OH group is added, it's different and can become very, very, very excessively psychoactive for up to several days. with the CBD-rich medications, we're seeing absolutely for certain prolonged effects for pain, anxiety, and whether it's hydroxylated or whatever happens to it in the liver, can't be sure what happens, perhaps in cancer cells and other things. But as far as pain, anxiety, and symptoms that we can see relief in, it's long-acting when it's absorbed properly. So what we often tell patients is, since they have an extract that's in a dosed sprayer, is to dose X milligrams of CBD and THC onto a little piece of toast and put some avocado or coconut oil on it and eat it first thing in the morning. And that's what this caller was referring to. It seems like avocados, awesome, but we need studies. We need to have a simple machine. And, Jeff, as we expand our clinical lab here, I mean, why couldn't we have a gas chromatography machine when we're measuring blood counts and other chemistry things on our patients and just measure a CBD level? How tough would that be to do?
Technically, it's not too difficult, other than getting clinical lab licenses to handle the bodily fluid, to do the test the right way, and then probably GCMS is the way you'd want to go, because there'll be low levels of the metabolites that you'd want to detect.
Yeah, well, this would be a clinical laboratory with a clinical license doing full spectrum of blood results. So as far as you know, there would be no issues legally or technically in getting a level.
I don't think so, no, just as long as you have a clinical lab license to be able to handle bodily fluids. That's required in California. I think that's the only one.
What do you think about being able to use those both for research purposes and also for, I think, clinically, it's going to be a while where that's going to be very, very helpful, especially with people who absorb so differently. It'd be nice.
Well, yeah, that's required so that you understand the absorption rates of the different populations, too, or which method of delivery is best. And if you can watch both of them, CBD and the liver metabolites, you could then understand which the sublingual route was delivering and how well it stayed around in those forms before your liver got to it and excreted it versus an oral route. So it's very important understanding exactly what's in the body and how it's traversing through there and what it could be doing. So, it's going to be required at some point for sure.
Yeah, so we're hoping to have that set up by the end of the year with some luck. But yes, it would be part of a full clinical lab. How long it stays in the serum, I mean, I imagine we'll be able to even, not as part of routine care, but...
I hope we do THC stuff as well so that you can see the driving limit type ideas. When they talk about 5 nanograms per mil, well, what causes that? How do you get to that level? How is that different if you're a heavily experienced user, have been using it for a long time? Different people respond differently at different levels, and tolerance does build up to being quote-unquote impaired. So I think, there may be regimes or treatment modalities where you start them off slow and work your way up, and then their blood levels may be very different throughout the course, but that might be the most effective way to treat whatever you're after.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like this is the next thing that I really need as a clinician working with the dosable medicines. So let's go back to this question we were talking about earlier about the CBD, including CBDA, having strong psychoactive effects without THC. I have one quick comment on that this is where we have to really start differentiating. When you say CBD, cannabidiol, what do you mean? Do you mean crystalline, synthetically made, or, I guess, extracted, pure molecular CBD in some type of liquid or injectable or oral buccal, for that matter, form, or are we talking about a whole plant extract where the milligrams, you can still measure how many milligrams of CBD you're giving somebody, but it's either only CBD or it's CBD plus hundreds of other molecules. Right. And I just have 2 quick things to say, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. That one, in studies that are even published as YouTube videos now, I think many of us seen the injection of a large dose of IV THC and the person becoming very agitated and paranoid, and then getting, hundreds of milligrams, 500-600 milligrams of molecular IV CBD and feeling awesome. And then somehow between that and other studies that have been published, the concept that you need, hundreds of milligrams of CBD to treat somebody. And when we're dealing with whole plant medicine for anxiety, I would say the average daily dose is 6 to 8 milligrams per day. And sometimes it's less than that. And I've heard patients, I've had 2 patients in England that were using Sativex, which is a whole plant extract. I've had several patients here, and frankly, I did it once myself just to confirm it. That when you start getting to 50 milligrams or so of whole plant CBD without THC, you start getting out-of-body experiences. I mean, whether that's good or bad. And this one patient I had, and that's why I actually tried it myself, he was a very elderly person. He's from this, he lived through the 60s in a very wild way. And he called me afterwards, and he just kept taking more. He liked the taste, I think. And all of a sudden, he had an out-of-body experience, which for him was awesome because his body is racked. So to have out-of-body experiences where your consciousness you're still awake, alert, focused, but an out-of-body experience is psychoactive. I mean, it's very psychoactive. So is it the CBD? Yeah. No, it's everything else. So I just want to emphasize again before we hear from you, Jeff, molecular CBD is a very different medicine than whole plant CBD.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, some of the other components in the plant are active themselves in the cannabinoid system and would have an impact. And it is really what's going along with them. It's not just CBD by itself. So something like Marinol, THC all by itself is drastically different than the plant. And you can see that by how many people are using which version of that. And I think it speaks to efficacy, but certainly also to psychoactivity. So, and it's a broad term. When do you feel a substantive change inside of your mind, basically, or your state of being? And that can be different levels for different people, too. So just because it's not psychoactive and causing colors the same way that maybe THC is at exceptionally high doses, CBD may cause some sort of effects that feel like you're, having a somewhat psychoactive effect as well. So, but it is, I think, related more to everything else that's going with it and all of them working together as opposed to just one molecule doing that.
I mean, I would also argue, because I think we have to it's like I said on the last 2 shows, that differentiating between recreational cannabis and medicinal cannabis is a silly waste of energy. It's I think the only value of that is political, religious, and tax. And for us to be inside somebody else's head to decide what their intent is pretty tough. So it's really hard to know when you say CBD, when we're told that CBD itself, and leaving out all the rest of the molecules, that let's say CBD relieves anxiety. Is that psychoactive? I mean, I don't know. I would say yes.
Technically, you're causing a change in your mental state, right? Isn't that, the technical definition, causing a change in my mental state would be psychoactive. So you could say all the SSRIs are as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think technically you would say so, but it's not in the same way we think about it recreationally. So the word has been blurred and the definition's not the same. So
think about this as we close out this segment. We've all taken a lemon and inhaled the scent and inhaled it, and we don't do it with many fruits or vegetables, and we do that because of the limonene. And limonene is a terpene, and it affects our cannabis receptor, CB1 receptor, and makes us feel good. And the Medical Cannabis Hour with Dr. Allan Frankel, and we'll be tuning into our final segment today.